and cherished memories to me, and it probably does for many of you in the audience. I have become deeply concerned about the explosion of injection wells that have occurred in Ohio, and specifically in Washington County. Here are some facts. Our county alone has more Class II injection wells than the entire state of Pennsylvania. We are ranked second in Ohio of all 88 counties for the sheer volume of toxic radioactive oil and gas brine that is taken in and injected into our ground. That's astounding. 88 counties, and we rank second. In a 10-year period, 2.8 billion, and that's with a B, gallons of radioactive waste, which could fill up 4,313 Olympic-sized swimming pools, has been injected into Washington County's ground. These are alarming numbers, and we need to take note of the facts and the possible implications for our communities. I'm honored to welcome you on behalf of Washington County for Safe Drinking Water. We formed this group because Washington County deserves, and I mean deserves, transparency, accountability, and science-based decision-making when it comes to radioactive oil and gas waste disposal. The decisions being made today will shape the safety of our aquifers, our rivers, and the health of our families for decades to come. Your presence shows that our communities are paying attention and that we care deeply about protecting what cannot be replaced. Tonight, we have gathered experts who can help us understand not only what is happening locally, but also what the evidence tells us about injection wells and the risk they pose. The goal is straightforward. Share clear information, strengthen public understanding, empower all of us to advocate for responsible decisions that will keep our drinking water safe. We'll begin with a short overview of our organization and why we are mobilizing at this moment. Then you will hear from Jess Archer, who will walk us through what is happening with injection wells in the area, what permits have been issued, what their capacities are, and what risks they raise for groundwaters and rivers. Next, you'll see a video of some of our neighbors who have been impacted by injection wells. And after that, Bev Reed from Buckeye Environmental Network will explain the new legal challenges against ODNR's permitting of 2-class injection wells within 2 miles of Marietta. She'll share what the expert report found, specifically that these wells present a real and tangible threat to local drinking water resources. Then we will turn to the keynote speakers, who each bring decades of experience and national level insight. Dr. John Stoltz from Pittsburgh, Justin Noble from New York, and Dr. Ted Ock from Cleveland. We'll wrap up with a panel Q&A, followed by closing remarks and a call to action, outlining what each of us can do next. But first, just a little bit more about our organization. It was formed in 2025 in response to the injection wells that are within 2 miles of Marietta's and Williamstown source water protection area, and less than 5 miles from Warren's and Putnam's water. In all, There are 7 injection wells, 4 in operation now, 2 recently permitted by ODNR, and a Class 1 injection well less than 2 miles from aquifers that provide water for 32,000 people. This is an astonishing and disturbing fact. We are the only town in southeast Ohio, and maybe in Ohio, that has injection wells anywhere near close to their aquifers. We are a coalition of residents. We're scientists, business owners, educators, and everything in between. Basically, we're just worried citizens, really worried about this situation. We are working together to safeguard drinking water, public health, and the environment in our communities, and we're deeply concerned about the growing threat of toxic, radioactive, and gas waste, often called brine, that is being injected in huge volumes underground Marietta, as well as in all of Washington County. And our mission is simple: to ensure every person in Washington County has access to clean, safe water, free from toxic chemicals. We are working with the support of the Buckeye Environmental Network, a well-established group that has been working on this issue for many years. And now I would like to introduce Jessica Archer, who will provide an overview of injection wells in our town and local areas. Jess?
We have a few folks that are trying to get seated, so I want to ask that if people can kind of compress so that there are seats available for people to get into that aren't all the way in the middle. Just a quick little shuffle. Get to know your neighbors a little better. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to learn about what is happening here in Washington County. I want to start with some basic information about injection wells. It takes 20 to 30 million gallons of water to frack one horizontal oil and gas well. Hundreds of chemicals are injected into fracking wells. These are chemicals to hold open the rock, things like surfactants, lubricants, and volatile organic compounds. The wastewater that comes back up, known as fracking brine, is high in salt, heavy metals, toxic chemicals, and is radioactive. Heavy metals such as lead, cadmium, and arsenic cause developmental delays in children, reproductive impacts, and cancer. There is no safe level of lead for children. Fracking brine has been found to contain compounds like PFAS, otherwise known as forever chemicals. PFAS is a family of 2,000 compounds, one of which is C8, which we are all familiar with from the water contamination from DuPont. Fracking brine has been found to be highly radioactive. It's important to understand that this kind of radiation is different than the gamma radiation that you would experience flying on a plane or something like that. Gamma radiation diminishes once you leave the plane and you get away from the source. Alpha radiation, on the other hand, which is found in fracking brine, when these alpha particles are ingested, these particles cannot get out of your body, ever. The body sees this like calcium and incorporates it into the bones. Children's cells are in a state of rapid metabolic overdrive. The reproduction of their bone cells is thousands of times faster than ours, so bone cancer from exposure to alpha radiation can spread like wildfire. The safe drinking water standard for radium is 5 picocuries per liter, 5. In a Pennsylvania wastewater study looking at brine, they found that in this region carried an average of 8,344 picocuries per liter, with the maximum that they found being 28,500. Some fracking operations will recycle this brine on site, but in some cases, like we're talking about here, they dispose of this waste using injection wells to re-inject the waste fluids back into the ground in Class II wells at high pressure, intending to trap it deep within rock formations. Ohio has 241 active injection wells with 19 more permitted or in construction. For comparison, Pennsylvania has 16 and West Virginia has about 50. Ohio also takes in waste from other states. One thing that I continue to hear from people in the oil and gas industry is, we aren't fracking in Washington County. Why are we taking in all this waste here? While many factors might influence this, the lax regulatory framework in Ohio appears to be a driving force. In Pennsylvania, the US EPA regulates injection wells. In West Virginia, it's the state's environmental agency. In Ohio, this responsibility is delegated from the federal EPA down to the Ohio DNR, not even the state's environmental agency and not the agency in charge of the Safe Drinking Water Act. This isn't just about drinking water. Take a close look at the oil and gas wells on this map, all those green dots, and think about what can happen when toxic brine is injected nearby at high pressures. Washington County has 17 active Class II injection wells. An additional Class II well was recently permitted. We have the second highest volume of waste injected in the state. One of our biggest concerns is the potential for impacts to our drinking water sources. Even in conversations with engineers and workers in the oil and gas field, everyone keeps telling me the same thing. If injection wells are used to dispose of brine, it should be far from populations and drinking water sources. Some of these wells are less than 2 miles from our aquifers. While your drinking water is tested for some key toxics like lead, it isn't and it can't. The technology doesn't exist to test it for all the toxics. And if you're on a private well, the testing is left to you and it can be prohibitively expensive. While some toxics can be removed from drinking water, some serious contaminants like radiation cannot. So what can go wrong? It turns out quite a bit. I'm going to talk now about an incident that happened in Noble County. So in Noble County, brine began showing up in oil wells that were near 2 injection wells owned by Deep Rock Disposal Solutions. The first known occurrence was in 2010, about 1.5 miles away. Then it happened again in 2013. It got worse in 2019, and then in 2021. In 2021, ODNR documented uncontrolled streams of brine coming from production wells up to 5 miles away from the injection site. The division incurred a cost of $1.2 million to take corrective actions. The blowout leaked into a nearby stream, killing hundreds of animals. The last straw for Deep Rock came in 2023, when an ODNR inspector received a report that brine was, and I quote, spraying from a hole in the casing of a production well. This spraying brine caused imminent health, safety, and environmental risk, ODNR wrote in the suspension order. 13 years after the first report of a flooded production well nearby, ODNR ordered Deep Rock to halt injections at its 2 wells. Brian Chavez, our state senator and former owner of Deep Rock, responded that he disagreed with this decision. So what did ODNR do? They sued the production well company's insurance rather than suing Deep Rock. This is similar to someone, in my opinion, slamming into your car at the grocery store and then walking away while you're left to pay the costs. Even after all of this, Deep Rock is petitioning ODNR right now to open these wells. I'm going to talk more about leaking injection wells, and here's a map of some of those wells. So in Athens County, there were issues with 3 injection wells that were owned by K&H Partners. A production well owner reported in 2019 that his 30-year-old oil well suddenly stopped giving oil and instead started to spit out, this is in quotes, 100 barrels of brine in 90 minutes until it was shut in, ODNR wrote in the suspension order. This was 3/4 of a mile from the K&H wells. In September 2020, A similar episode arose at another oil and gas well a mile east of the K&H wells. Then, in 2021, it happened again, this time a mile and a half east. After ruling out other sources, ODNR determined that the K&H wells were, and this is a quote again, the only nearby injection well that injected brine at volumes large enough to migrate to the impacted production wells. It wasn't until June of 2023 that ODNR ordered that K&H stop injecting. The Oil and Gas Commission on October 3rd sided with K&H, reversing the suspension order on an interim basis and providing no further explanation until the hearing. After the hearing, the commission sided with ODNR and suspended it. After the first reported incident, the ODNR determined it wasn't brine migration. Then later, they admitted they were wrong, and it actually was, but not until they hired a third-party consultant. The wells are now plugged. In Washington County, we have a similar situation with Redbird number 4. This is out Vito Road. The Redbird number 4 injection well in Washington County started operations in November of 2018. About a year later, ODNR determined that some of the 4.2 million gallons of brine injected at that point had migrated to 28 different production wells as far as 5 miles away. Instead of ordering the owners to suspend operations, ODNR allowed them to modify their permit and inject into a different rock formation in depth. The well is currently active. Despite the interventions and the deeper drilling, the production wells are still having issues. Could this be due to continued brine migration from injection wells? I'm not going to have time tonight to talk in detail about all the impacts to production wells in Washington County, but I will say that there are issues with the Chrismar wells owned by Old South Oil being pressurized. That's near American Growers number 1. We've got some maps around so you can see where all of these are, but there's issues with the Chrismar wells. Oh, I just said that. The Buckhorn well, also near American Growers number 1, which is pressurized. The Wilson well near the Heinrich injection well, which flooded in 2025. And those last 2 cases, ODNR inspected it, but they won't share their reports. So one big concern that you're probably picking up on for some of this around some of the injection wells in Washington County is that ODNR is using expired, lax rules to regulate these wells. In 2022, the state rules for injection wells were replaced with new, more protective rules. The new rules include a larger area for review, additional corrective action steps, limitations on injection when producing wells are in the area of review, greater setbacks from homes, greater setbacks from water sources, that's a big one, limitations on injecting in certain formations, and then greater standards for seismic activity. ODNR decided to apply the old rules for the American Growers number 4 below Bramblewood, and then the Stephen number 1, which is at Bramblewood Heights, in violation of settled law. All of the failed Class 2 wells in Southeast Ohio are permitted under these old rules, which makes you wonder, do they work? ODNR stated that the old rules would apply to these wells to their construction, but the new rules would apply to the operation. So of course, we asked the question, if these wells would even be permitted under the new rules. ODNR said, and I quote, "The division is not able to determine whether corrective action will be required under the new rules because the applicant may change the surface location to comply with siting requirements. The division does not have enough information to determine whether the Stephen number 1 well would be permitted under the new permitting rules. The new rules include new siting criteria that may have resulted in the location of the proposed Stephen number 1 being altered or the subject tract being enlarged. The division does not know whether the applicant would have been able to satisfy those new criteria." So in my short description of government speak there, they're basically saying that it's unlikely these would be permitted in this site. So next I'm going to talk about a proposed Class 1 injection well here. In April of 2025, Deep Rock applied for a Class 1 injection well, American Growers number 3 near Bramblewood Heights. These wells present a unique risk to Washington County. There are only about 800 Class 1 wells in the entire country. In Ohio, these are primarily in the northwest part of the state. And that's because Class 1 wells present a threat to fracking operations, to oil and gas extraction. Therefore, they're sited in areas where fracking is not taking place. The specific geological formation that Deep Rock is proposing to inject this waste into has never had a Class 1 well drilled in the state's history. There's only been one instance of a Class 1 well being permitted in the Appalachian, Ohio region, and that's the Haverhill well. This well failed due to vertical brine migration and was shut down and abandoned. It failed partially due to the way it was drilled and partially due to the geology of the region. Companies and regulators will tell you that only non-hazardous material would be injected into these wells. And I want to note that this non-hazardous definition is purely a legal definition. It is not a scientific definition. It's not a public health definition. It's a legal definition. The chemicals that would be injected into this well are without a doubt hazardous and toxic. This would include things like landfill leachate, wastewater and industrial process water, mining, municipal sewage systems. It could also include brines, sludges, oil field fluids, cooling waters, and even contaminated groundwater. One thing that I think is important to note for our community is that this can also be concentrated PFAS remediation liquids. Landfills accept PFAS filters, so those C8 filters, from water systems. The water is then collected and sent to Class 1 wells. So the remediation and filtering of the forever chemicals that DuPont has put into the environment would get injected right back into the region where it came from. Another example of what they call non-hazardous waste is the cleanup water from the East Palestine train derailment disaster. That wastewater went into a Class 1 non-hazardous well in Coshocton. So to summarize our concerns, brine has been found to migrate up to 5 miles away from injection wells. This presents a risk to our drinking water aquifers and to production wells. Impacts to our water aquifers would affect the health of our community and the livability of the area. And finally, we're concerned about the financial burdens to those losing their production wells. So we're fighting back in a number of ways. First, we're raising public awareness about this issue. At the end of today's meeting, we'll talk about what you can do to support the effort. We're also supporting the city and our local water boards' moratoriums on injection wells. And finally, the Buckeye Environmental Network is suing ODNR for not enforcing the more protective rules for these injection wells. We have some index cards. I think we already talked about the index cards, but if you write down any questions during the presentation today, just hold them up, and Dawn and Caroline will collect those. What's that? Raise your hand if you need a card. Yeah, raise your hand if you need a card, if you have questions. Thank you all for listening. Next, you'll hear from some of our neighbors about issues that they're seeing with their production wells. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Oh. So before we bring up the next speaker, we do have some boxes for donations that are going around. And if you're able, it would be fabulous if you could donate to this cause. It all goes to our group, Washington County for Safe Drinking Water. We're all volunteers, so it pays for things like signs or billboards or flyers, things like that. So please consider donating. And the next speaker that I'm going to bring up today is Bev Reed. She is the Buckeye Environmental Network organizer, and she is going to tell us all about the ODNR lawsuit.
Good evening, everyone. As Jess said, I'm the Appalachian organizer with Buckeye Environmental Network. We're a statewide Ohio group, and we have been working on injection wells for over 15 years. Our founder, Teresa Mills, started working on injection wells. She worked with some communities in Clyde, Ohio, with a Class 1 injection well where there was a cancer cluster of children. there. And so she took it upon herself to research this stuff, and we're still doing it today. We're focused on Class 2 wells because at the time, Class 2 wells weren't as prevalent as they are now with fracking in the region. So tonight I'm going to talk briefly about the lawsuit that we filed against the Ohio Department of Natural Resources for permitting these 2 Class 2 injection wells. I'm not going to go too in-depth about it because we're going to turn it over to the other speakers in a moment. But essentially, we had to file the lawsuit because the ODNR used expired rules when permitting these 2 wells. DOGRM, which stands for the Oil and Gas Resource Management, has created a rare and extraordinary case where an agency has refused to apply the clear requirements set forth in its own regulations when permitting activities that carry immense risk to public health, safety, and the environment. This is straight from the lawsuit that this is public information. Anybody can read this. ODNR gave no reasoning as to why they used the outdated rules. They just said the company applied for the permit at a certain time frame, and that's why. They never, even though they've been asked by the city of Marietta, they've been asked by residents, they give no real explanation as to why they chose to do this, other than just saying we chose to do it because we did it. So the ODNR has the primary enforcement authority. As it was said before, Pennsylvania, it's the US EPA that has it, but in Ohio it's the ODNR. Just a couple notes here. So when permitting this, they used only a half-mile area review instead of the 2-mile area review that the new rules would have required. So in doing that, they only found 12 oil and gas wells that were located within a half mile of the permitted wells, of the Stephan 1 well. 12 oil and gas wells. If they would have used the expanded 2-mile radius, there are approximately 191 oil and gas wells located in that. Therefore, those are just simply not documented by ODNR and by the company. And that's very concerning. Right in here, in the permit for the Stephan 1 well, the ODNR says, a permit is a privilege, not a right. So that is, they say that, they state that. Let's see here. And then the American Growers 4, by applying the half-mile area review for the American Growers 4, they did not evaluate 188 wells for corrective action that they would have evaluated if they applied the new rules. So hundreds of wells were left out of consideration. Further on in the lawsuit, it states here that all the oil and gas wells in the 2-mile radii around the proposed wells are potential conduits for Class 2 waste to reach the surface or underground sources of drinking water if out-of-zone migration of waste occurs. So that's the whole point here, is that those wells can be conduits for the, and as you saw before with Mr. Chamberlain's well and other ones, that's a real concern. And last but not least, this waste has actually migrated in other states. It's happened in Oklahoma, and it's happened in Texas, and it is happening here in Ohio. But in Oklahoma and Texas, the problem is pretty bad. There's some articles here I hope you will check out where this problem is very prevalent. And they call it purges, where the waste just comes up to the surface out of these abandoned wells. And it creates pools of this toxic waste in a field, for example. So stay informed, and excited for these next speakers.
All right. There's a petition going around that I want to encourage everyone to sign. The petition supports the moratorium passed unanimously by the Marietta City Council and by several water boards, which would pause injection wells in Washington County. Well, we would be asking the state to pause the injection wells in our county. So our first keynote speaker of the night, I would like to introduce Dr. John Stoltz. John has a bachelor's degree in biology and a PhD in microbial ecology and evolution. He's a professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at Duquesne University and served as the director of the Center of Environmental Research and Education and interim chair of the Department of Environmental and Energy Engineering in 2025. He's published 104 peer-reviewed articles, 47 book chapters, and 3 books. So welcome, Dr. John Stoltz.
Okay, good, thanks. All right, thank you so much. And I'm really honored to be here tonight. I've heard a lot. I've spent a lot of time in Ohio over the last many years. My sojourn began in 2010 when I visited a farm in Hickory, Pennsylvania. It was the second Marcellus well drilled, and got to know the farmer pretty well. So it's been quite the journey, but again, one of the concerns that people had about this new type of drilling, the horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, was the amount of water that was going to be needed to actually do the fracking, and then they didn't realize that, yeah, some of this stuff comes back up, and it's called produced water, and it's really salty. But it turns out that this kind of dynamic had been known for years by the conventional wells, but it wasn't as salty, okay, simply put. So let me see what I got here. All right, oops, okay. So again, what is the discussion today? The discussion today is how we get rid of this oil and gas waste, because you're going to have drill cuttings and you're going to have this wastewater, both from the wet drilling to actually drill the well, as well as what is produced. There's formation water that's down there already that gets released when you do the process of hydraulic fracturing itself. So you have liquids and solids, and it's got to go somewhere. Now, the thing is, in the old days, and you've been hearing about this, I mean, I will admit I'm a transplant. I moved to Pittsburgh for my job at Duquesne University in 1990, and I really I deliberately avoided oil and gas research, even though my research into microbiology coincided so many times with the types of organisms that I was working with. Well, anyway, 2010, that all changed. So the thing is, what I've been doing since that time is looking how the development of unconventional oil and gas plays leads to and potentially causes environmental harms and degradation of drinking water sources, and less so the health issues, but obviously they're also of great concern. So what I wanted to do, and I've done this before with a group in Clairsville, because they got a Class 2 injection well several years ago, and that was my first introduction to the injection wells. But this is from your O&R Division of Oil and Gas. I guess we'll be posting the slides later that you can. I would check this out, because it's one of those things, and I've found that it's very, very frustrating. It's not just dealing with the oil and gas industry itself and their narratives that they live by, okay? One of them, and we like to call it the lies of Marcellus, is it's never contaminated drinking water sources. That's a myth, okay? It does, okay? And we now know that that's the case, but they will never, ever, ever admit that because they can't, okay? It opens them to litigation. But even here, in the traditional days, it was considered these wastewaters that were produced from the oil and gas wells as brine, just salty water. But again, I don't think you'd want to brine your turkey with this stuff, okay? It's toxic. And the fact now, it's like oil and gas industry on steroids. A single well will go out several miles. It will generate hundreds of millions of tons of solid waste and is fracked in many cases with up to 30 million gallons of water in a single well. And we have mega pads that have up to, or at least permitted to have, up to 40 wells on a single pad. going out in different directions. So you have this tremendous amount of waste. And you've got activities in 3 states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And Ohio, for whatever reason, felt that they could handle the wastewater. And so they are, as you've already seen, over 200, almost 260 Class 2 wells in this state. We have a handful in Pennsylvania because our geology can't handle it. But anyway, what are the different classifications? Again, this is all off and available on the ODNR website. I would recommend you take a look at it. There's the Class 1 to inject hazardous waste, industrial non-hazardous liquids, or municipal wastewater. Class 2, injection, brines, and other fluids associated with oil and gas production and hydrocarbons for storage. But notice that injection of brine, and again I say, what do you think when you think of brine? You think of salty water, right? A little sodium chloride, a little table salt. Okay, and then the other thing is, what are these injection wells? Well, the interesting thing is, instead of getting gas and oil out of them, you're injecting fluids into them. So oftentimes, some of these wells are new wells, but other times they're just repurposed old wells being injected into a depleted gas or oil field. So again, my question is always, where does it go? How far does it go? And as you heard one of those oilmen talking about, wait a minute, you've invaded my property. In order to get gas and oil from a well, you need a permit. You need the lease from the landowner. You need whoever has the mineral rights in order for you as the company to drill and frack and get that oil and gas. But you don't need that for an injection well. So we really don't know what sort of trespass is going on because we don't know how far these fluids are going. So again, it looks very similar in construction to an oil and gas well. They have multiple casings, which is interlaced to pipes and cement. The idea being that you want to isolate and make sure that you don't interact with the aquifer and other strata, because again, these wells are going down several thousand feet. They're going to go through coal mines potentially. They're going to go through or coal seams and limestone and other things, perhaps even some an old, as we've heard, a conventional play for oil and gas. But anyway, again, by design, they're supposed to be, protecting the environment. Okay, so here again, this is from, and you've got the documentation there. These are all the the Class 2 brine injection wells of Ohio, most recently that's been posted on your ODNR website. There's a lot there. And this is the thing that also puzzles me, is like, okay, you're putting these wells in close proximity, but you still don't know how far these fluids are going. The other thing is that if you look at these maps, you see all these green dots, those are the old conventional wells. So they're everywhere, and there's no consideration. And usually the zone of that they have to make sure there aren't any pre-existing structures or wells or whatever is a quarter of a mile. Okay, so I mean, and they're going into the same strata.